Yankee Doodle dandy, a Yankee Doodle do or die. A real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. Good boy, kid.
Welcome everybody to the Rhinebeck Historical Society monthly meeting. It's hard to believe that it's been 100 years since Rhinebeck and the rest of America was involved in World War I. And there's a lot of commemorative ceremonies and events going on around the county. Mike Frazier and I have been working with Bill Jeffway, the Dutchess County Historical Society president, as well as Melody Moore and Sharon Sherrod, who are here too. We're working, putting together an exhibit. Bill Jeffway is doing every town in the county to try to get them to put together the history of their specific town. We're going to have a big exhibit in May at the FDR Library. I don't know the date yet, but we're going to put that together with exhibits from each town. And we have several events here. We have an event next month where Don Frazier is coming to talk about the end of the Gilded Age, which is what happened when World War I ended. He's from Mills Mansions. And we have a speaker coming, Trish McAvoy, in the fall, talking about women in World War I. And Bill Jeffway is going to talk about another topic in World War I in the fall as well. And my lovely wife, Judy Merritt, has an article coming out in a week or so with our February newsletter about horses in World War I. So you'll be seeing that soon. But before I get into the Rhinebeck's involvement in life in Rhinebeck, I thought I would give you a little synopsis, a 10-minute synopsis of the war and how we got into it. So, it was a great war. The war to end all wars. Of course, it was not. But it began with, I think everybody knows this, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia were touring Serbia on June 28th of 1914 when an attempted assassination by Serbian nationalists took place. They threw a bomb at his entourage. They missed him, but they injured some of his attendants in another car. So he went on with his tour, and when he finished the tour at the end of the day, he said, "I'd like to go to the hospital and visit the people who were injured." His driver took a wrong way street, met some more nationalists who shot him and his wife Sophia, and that was the trigger that started the war. Austro-Hungary had been very angry at Serbia. They wanted to try to find a way into the war. They made a list of demands that were impossible for Serbia to meet, and a month later they invaded Serbia. And that triggered a whole bunch of alliances and created the World War. I have a little map here. Germany was allied with Austro-Hungary, as well as the Ottoman Empire, which became Turkey. France was pledged to protect Serbia. Great Britain got involved because of France. Russia was involved because they were part of the protection. And it was a world war. There were several neutral countries like Norway, Sweden, and Netherlands, and of course Switzerland. But it was a world war because there were French and German and English territories in Africa, in Asia. And people thought they would take advantage of this to regain territory lost in old wars. And they thought that this thing would last. By the end of the year, we would win. Or the other guys thought they would win. That didn't happen. By the end of 1914, a line of trenches, a stalemate occurred. A line of trenches ran from the North Sea all the way down to the border of Switzerland, just inside of the French border. And this war went on for 3 years. Millions of people died, and they didn't move anywhere. It was the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Verdun, and other famous battles, but nothing happened. And America got in for several reasons. The first reason, The first reason was, early in the war, the British obtained copies of the German code book from a ship that they captured. I think everybody remembers Bletchley Park and the Enigma machine from World War II. Same thing happened in World War I. They got a copy of the code book. The British could crack the code. And they got this telegram, which is in 1917, sent from the German Zimmermann, who was the foreign minister of Germany, to the German litigation in Mexico, asking the Mexicans to get involved in the war on the side of Germany. And when they won the war, they would give them back California, Texas, New Mexico. It was a great plot. Well, the British sent this to the Americans. That's what they were hatching, and that got everybody upset. The second reason was the Kaiser hated democracies. The Kaiser believed that all countries should be run by emperors or kings. And he really actually had hatched a plot. This is not far-fetched. He hatched a plot around the turn of the century, about 1900, to send 100,000 troops and a fleet of ships to invade New York and Boston, disrupt our economy, and damage our democracy. They told him that was too expensive. We couldn't fight a war 3,000 miles away. So they just worked on building the military in Germany itself for a war in Europe. Now, here he is, smoking a cigarette, sitting on a very nice-looking horse. And secondly, he said that anybody supplying food or supplies to his enemies, he'd sink their ships. And he began sinking American ships on the high seas. That got everybody upset. And lastly, I did not know this until I started doing research. This is Jersey City, a munitions plant. German saboteurs began blowing up plants in America. I was not aware that this happened before the war got started. So that was like the last straw, because people had been very upset from 2 years before, when the Lusitania was sunk. It was a cruise ship. It was a harmless thing. The Germans sunk it. 128 Americans were on board. So it was several reasons and 2 years of anger before they declared war on Germany on April 6th of 1917. So another strange event that happened was Germany had been looking here. Wait. General Pershing led the American Expeditionary Force, and he went to Europe in the fall of 1917. It took a while for the troops to get to the front, because the Allies said, well, they'll be under our control. And General Pershing said, you've killed millions of men. I'm not giving you my boys. I will manage my troops, and you will tell me what the battles are going to be. So that delayed getting to the front. So the Americans began to get in, and now the war had dragged on. The Americans began moving, and now the Russian Revolution took place in 1917. And Germany had been really struggling, fighting a war on two fronts. It happened to Napoleon, it happened in World War II, it happened in World War I. And the Kaiser was looking for a way out of the Eastern Front. Bolsheviks started the revolution. Lenin was trapped in Switzerland. And the Germans, the Kaiser arranged for him to get across Germany, I think through Finland and into Russia, with the promise that when the Bolsheviks won the war, the revolution, he would end the war. And on March 3rd, 1918, they won, and he ended the war. And that allowed the Germans to move all their troops to the Western Front. And that was the beginning of the St. Michael Offensive, which they started May 27th, 1918. They started 2 million troops moving towards France. And it was a surprise, and they moved quickly in the first few days, but that didn't last very long, because a lot of people were getting upset about this. The German troops were starving. The Germans at home were starving. Here's the naval blockade of Germany. Britain had the strongest navy in the world, and they've been blocking Germany for the entire war, and the Germans were starving. They were running out of raw materials, running out of food, running out of supplies. The German troops were disenfranchised. And the final killer of this, as the Germans began to lose their spirit, the soldiers, was the spirit of the Bolshevik Revolution spread to Germany. And a lot of people were protesting, let's get rid of the Tsar, the Kaiser, let's have the same thing that happened with the Tsar, and let's have some democracy or something going on here. The Kaiser arrested them all and sent all the dissidents to the Western Front. So now you had soldiers that were upset to begin with, and he sent thousands of dissidents, and the Americans were there. The Americans, the British, the French pushed back all the way to the German border, and now they had to make a decision. It was the fall, and they didn't fight wars in the winter. So what do? You could wait until the spring. If you did, the Germans might have time to rearm and strengthen themselves, and you might have a war dragging on to 19 or 20, which they didn't want. So they made a decision for an armistice. And the French General Marshal Foch, big mistake, he said, they'll be back in 20 years. And he was wrong by 65 days. So they had the armistice. They signed the armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th month of the 11th day, 1918. And it took 8 more months for the Treaty of Versailles, but they signed the Armistice, and the Kaiser ran away to the Netherlands. He lived in exile in the Netherlands for the rest of his life. And that was, the end of the war for now. The war, 100,000 Americans were killed in the short time we were there, like 6 to 8 months actually fighting in the field. Probably 8 to 10 million soldiers, 8 to 10 million civilians died. And it would have cost in 2018 dollars, 20 to 30 trillion dollars. That's what this war would have cost. So what was life like in Rhinebeck during the war? Here's the Doughboy plaque. Here's the Roll of Honor. And it's 200 men, and that's what Sharon and Melody have been working on. They fought in the war, and you see the stars there. 8 of them died. And they were Edward J. Bell, Roy T. Crucis, Edward Fitzpatrick, Arthur Hayne, Alpha W. Lane, George N. Miller, Guy Pindar, and Henry M. Suckley. As an example, Henry Suckley was the longest serving because he was there before the war started. He went over at the beginning of 1915 as a French ambulance driver. And he was there for a little over 2 years. And a month before the war ended, in March of 1917, he was driving his ambulance from the front to the hospital, and a bomb hit him, and he died. But I'll cover some more of the reasons why the men died, but he was our first to die. He was actually a non-combatant. So I have a lot of photographs from the Museum of Rhinebeck History, from our archives, other documents that we have, but in the archive room, we have the Gazette advertisers from 1846 to 2007. So I pulled out the 1917, 1918 books and started reading them. And they were indeed a weekly chronology of the war. And it was great material from the Gazette. So let's start. In March of 1917, the Americans signed a loyalty pledge and sent it to the President of the United States. 338 citizens came to the Gazette office and signed a pledge of loyalty, sent it to the President, and on March 31st, before the war was declared, the President acknowledges the declaration. The Gazette's received the following from President Wilson. The President thanks you for the goodwill which prompted your kind message, which has helped reassure him and keep him in heart. So, April 6th, the war was declared. The next week, April 21st, a patriotic meeting, big success, 700 people at a flag presentation in Town Hall. And a record of the speeches, and hear the war and see the pictures. America hadn't been involved, so Americans did not know what this war was about. We hadn't really paid a lot of attention to it until we went into it. So people came and lectured the citizens of Rhinebeck in what the war was about and why we were going into it. So in April, the governor appointed the Dutchess County Home Defense Committee. The editor of the Gazette, Jacob Strong, was appointed to the committee, and the first charge of the committee to ask elected officials in the town to locate land that could be put to use for growing food for the war effort. They asked that growing of food be added to the curriculum of all the schools. They started using school grounds and ball fields to grow food for the war effort. And they recruited campfire girls in food production. Here's a poster. I found a lot of posters on the web and a lot of sort of posters in the Gazette Advertiser as well. So, will you have a part in victory? Every garden a munitions plant. So what else was the function of the Home Defense Committee? In May, Merritt Traver appointed a 3-man committee. Ailey Stickle, we all know who Ailey Stickle was, E.C. Pullen, who was the principal of the high school, and you'll hear more about him in a minute, and Reverend Francis Little, to build the Corps. And the Rhinebeck Home Defense Corps, not as strange as you would think, because 20 years before, the Kaiser had plans to invade New York. So having a Home Defense Corps somehow made some sense. It said, find men who were physically fit, of good moral character between the age of 16 and 64. This group would be called upon by governor, sheriff, or mayor for a breach of the peace, tumult, riot, or resistance of process of the state, or imminent danger thereof. And basically they were to serve as an auxiliary of the National Guard. And by the end of the month, 71 men had signed up. Also, 1,000 home defense women had signed up statewide for local canning clubs for the food drive. So Supervisor Pottenberg attended a meeting to begin work on a draft. You had the home defense people, now you had to find soldiers to fight the war. And they used census data and voter registration data to find eligible candidates. So the first thing that happened, I'm trying to do this in chronological order, so I'm going to move month by month. How do you pay for this thing? So they had a bunch of Liberty bond rallies. And the idea was to, you would buy a $50 bond and you would get 3.5% exempt from taxes, and they wanted to raise $7 billion. And here's, whoops, millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. United States bonds, investment in the world. The country needs funds to carry on the war. $50 Liberty bond in $10 installments. Of course, you got them at Jacob Strong's office at the Rhinebeck Gazette. And here's some posters. We sell $10 Liberty loans. Easy way to save, because you could do it in $10 increments. And you buy a Liberty bond, lest I perish. So the statue was asking for help. So they explained, here's where your money went. June 9th, 1917, a soldier at the front, $500 would keep one soldier at the front for a year. $50 bond would clothe one soldier, buy 16 tents, 8 pairs of blankets, 1,000 rounds of ammunition, buy them at the Gazette office. They were also sold at banks, but I think most of them were sold at the Gazette office. And here is a picture on the Museum of Rhinebeck History of a Liberty Bond rally in front of the Beekman Arms. And that's the Petit Bistro, which was the cigar store, which was a shoe store at the time. So also in June, a campaign started for the Red Cross. Rhinebeck shares the Red Cross campaign. Town will lead the county activities to churches and raise money for the Red Cross. There were a lot of organizations, the Red Cross, the YMCA, the Boy Scouts, and on. I'm going to cover a couple of them. We'd be here till midnight if I try to cover all the organizations that helped in the war. So here is E.C. Pullen, one of the 3 members of the Rhinebeck group, and the principal, and he was named captain of the Home Defense Corps. And here is a picture of our Home Defense Corps lined up there, and you can see the names. There's Marquardt, Tremper, Van Kuren, Pottenberg, Briggs, Reichert. All the famous Rhinebeck names were in the Home Defense Corps. Now, in addition to uniforms, which they already had, they hoped to have guns by the end of the year, and by November, 14,000 men in New York State had signed up for the Home Defense Corps. So now, they had to have the regular army. So they moved on with the draft. Here's the Gazette, July 21st. Here are the classes of exempt for the conscription rules. If you were an officer in the army already, a minister, enemies, any enemy aliens, county municipal officials, all these different categories. But the category that got them in trouble was 11. The following are exempt. Any man whose wife as a child dependent on it, any man who's widow, any son of an age, and on and on and on. That was a lot of categories. Everybody would know somebody who was sick or infirmed as a reason why they wouldn't have to go. So that was their problem. By mid-July, all eligible men were assigned draft numbers, and New York State's quota was 120,000 men, but 50,000 were already in the Army, so 70,000. It was broken up into districts. They used the 1910 census. Dutchess County's quota was 396 men. Rhinebeck was part of District 2, from which 215 men were required. So they sent out 430 notices to try to get there. Now, how do you get to Millbrook, which is where the draft board was? So Jacob Strong arranged for cars and buses to take the men over to Millbrook to sign up for the draft or apply for an exemption. But a lot of people applied for exemption. So they had to have a second call at the end of August. Many draft exemption claims. Cars wanted to go to Millbrook for this trip. So they finally succeeded in getting exemptions, but the problem was that by the fall, this was in the newspaper, all exemptions are revoked by the governor because they weren't getting anybody. Everybody had a mother, a kid, a relative that was sick. They couldn't do it. Here's another little thing to note on the right side here. Rhinebeck gives $3,668 to the YMCA War Fund. They also helped with the war. As I said, many organizations. And they raised money from the churches, but of course the most money at the bottom was raised by the Gazette. So here's draft board moves to Rhinebeck. All right. So finally, a few months later, they moved the draft board to Rhinebeck. They established the local board number 2, and here they are. And Michael Frazier was kind enough to give me the names of the people. The draft board left to right is Tracy Dowes, 2 unidentified men, Sumner Simmons, Joseph Griffin, Benson Frost is the 3rd gentleman over. The secretary was Jesse Snyder. The 3rd row was Howard Buckley, Benjamin Tremper, and a Mr. O'Connell. So they were the local draft board. Now they didn't have to have transportation to go over to Rhinebeck. So the next thing that happened was Rhinebeck women to be Hooverized in 1917. Now, that didn't mean that Rhinebeck women were particularly dusty. It just meant that the combatants in the 1932 presidential election were involved in the war. FDR was Undersecretary of the Navy, and Herbert Hoover was the head of the Food Administration. It hadn't become the Food and Drug Administration yet, but he was in charge of food. And so Herbert Hoover, United States Food Administrator, was how do we raise money for food? That was his goal. How do we get food? How to get people to grow food? And I have some posters about food here. Helping Hoover in our U.S. school garden. As kids, I said, they would grow food in the school gardens. A lot of the land around the schools, maybe the playgrounds, the ball fields. Here's another one. Defeat the Kaiser and his U-boats. Victory depends on which fails first, food or frightfulness. Eat less wheat. Now, apparently, it was wheat and meat. I don't know why, but it was wheat and meat that they needed for the troops. And you could eat everything else, so buy fresh fish. The good butcher is telling the lady to buy some fish instead of meat. Save the meat for our soldiers and our allies. And waste not, want not. Prepare for winter. Save perishable foods by preserving now. And here's something from the Gazette. Eat us and save the wheat and the meat for our soldiers. And there's cheese and milk and corn and tomatoes and radishes and and ducks. And rabbits, but not wheat and meat. That's what the soldiers did. We'd lose the war if they didn't have the wheat and meat. The Beekman Arms joined the Food Administration, and the Beekman Arms had classes and had bread, meat, milk, teaching people how to preserve those foods. So, October 5th, they started the second Liberty Bond. Liberty Bonds keep both running. That's the American soldier chasing the Germans on the way to Berlin. Here's another one for the second Liberty Loan. Skip down to the cellar and get $3 or $4 billion for the gentleman, Hank. Hank is on his way down the cellar to get $3 or $4 billion. Every Liberty Bond is a shot at a U-boat. The second Liberty Loan. Buy your shot today and buy a Liberty Bond. And women, help America's sons win the war. Buy a government bond. The second Liberty Bond rally. By the end of the month, we exceeded our quota. We were asked to, Rhinebeck had an allotment of $111,000. We had $211,000 was raised. We exceeded our quota at all 5 Liberty Bond rallies. Rhinebeck was very patriotic. And here's a couple of Red Cross, call from no man's land. They wanted the nurses to come on over, and a lot of nurses, and I have a letter from one nurse in a minute, come over there and help the troops. Nurses, the call from no man's land is come across. So as the winter began, the fall of 1917, they had coal shortages because coal, as well as wheat and meat, were needed to win the war. So there was a lot of pressure. The Fuel Administration out to help. J.G. Webb, the Fuel Administrator of Dutchess County, had an appeal about the coal shortage. I'll show you that in a second, but notice again, Red Cross seal underway. Christmas seals. Christmas in 1917. Remember the Red Cross Christmas seals? To help the Red Cross. And here was burn wood, save coal by burning old wood. All are part of the time. Cut wood now. Conservation of the State of New York urges that wood be cut for this winter. The Rhinebeck Coal Company ready to contract the wood at standard clause because the coal had to go to fight the war effort. This is my favorite one, the coal hog. Here is a beast who ought to be in hotter clime than we're sea. The coal hog does not fear a breeze. He'd like to see his neighbors freeze. One more. Stand by the boys in the trenches, mine more coal, the United States Food Administration. Now, at the end of the year, the government came up with another idea for the beginning of 1918. You know, $10 a shot to add up to $50 to buy a bond was a lot of money in 1918. So they came up with war savings stamps, 25 cents. You get a little card. Of course, you get them in the Gazette office. The Little Brothers of Liberty Bonds, war savings stamps. You got a little card here, and you put quarters in it. And when they're filled up, somehow, I don't know how quarters add up to $4.12, but you get $5 when the war was over. And so it encouraged people, that they could do, just get $5 for the war, if not $50 bonds. So you got a lot of people involved in it. And here's a couple more posters. $5 for savings stamps, save and buy cash on an installment plan. Keep him free. There's planes flying around the Eagle. Buy war savings stamps. And boys and girls, you can help your Uncle Sam win the war. Save your quarters. So got children involved. Save your quarters, save your allowance, and buy war savings stamps. So on April 5th, the third Liberty loan, and this is I have a lot of interesting stuff on this, $3 billion. The third Liberty loan. Rhinebeck gave the Liberty coach a great welcome Sunday, May 5th, 1918. Now, the third Liberty bond rally, and I got some wonderful pictures from Scott Cruikshank. They rolled a Liberty ball from Buffalo to New York City, selling the bonds all along the way, 422 miles. And here is the rally in Rhinebeck. That's the Liberty coach, pulled by horses. They must have taken the horses away. Everybody's gathered around in front of the Beekman Arms to buy the Liberty bonds. Here's a picture of the Beekman Arms from the other side of the street. The crowd's buying Liberty bonds. And here it comes. Coming down the hill from, well, the Star Library isn't there then, but coming down the hill from Rhinecliff, it came over on the ferry, rolling down. There's the Liberty carriage, and the ball is in the background, pushed by Boy Scouts. Here's a picture of the Liberty coach, Buffalo to New York City. Other people were up on the top, and the horses pulled it. And here's a close-up. There's the Boy Scouts wheeling the Liberty ball, but I can't, see it very well. So I got this from a Buffalo newspaper, and that's what it looked like. Obviously it was red, white, and blue, and they actually rolled it 422 miles. And, starting, people dressed up as Uncle Sam, starting in Buffalo. So in case you wanted to see what it looks like, here's the third Liberty loan. That's a $100 bond with Jackson picture on it. There were several more drives after the war to pay the debts, but no more Liberty bonds. There's one interesting thing. I mentioned Principal E.C. Pullen was head of the Home Defense. Here's an article from the Gazette a few months into the war. Principal Pullen torpedoed on a ship. He was on the way to Europe for the YMCA. He was working for the YMCA as well. His ship was torpedoed and it sunk. He was in a lifeboat. He was saved and made it to France. So that was fortunate for him. Now, there were a lot of organizations involved in the war. And here is another one. Rhinebeck joins the Red Cross en masse. Hundreds enlisted for members in 1918 in Rhinebeck, not just County. and Red Cross campaign. And here was the Gazette. Red Cross branch organized Thursday. Mrs. Vincent Astor heads the branch for Rhinebeck of the Dutchess County chapter. And here from Helen Delaporte's book on World War I, which is in that cabinet, is a list. It's Mrs. Vincent Astor, Jane Esterhaus, Mrs. Tracy Dowse, May Odell. The executive committee was both Jacob Strong and Reichert, Frank Latson, Miss Williams. And on the bottom, it shows you some of the things: surgical dressings, garments, to help supply the nurses with the material they need. They also made like gift bags up for the soldiers. They would knit socks and underwear, and they put a whole little gift bag from Rhinebeck and send it over to France to give to the boys. And I'll read about that in a minute. So now we get to reality. The news begins to come in from the front. And I'll start reading a couple of these letters for you. This is a February 27, 1918 letter from Wagner Goldsmith. I want you to know, while being in France, the French hospital, I was gifted by a bag. I did not know what to say, but thank you. I opened it to my surprise and found a lot of people in my hometown did not forget me. I can't express my thoughts as to the use I can put to everything in the bag. I hope to let you know the French doctors and nurses did not know what to think of such a lovely gift. I want you to know everything will always think of you for everything of that dear friend in the dear town in New York. I would like to say much about the place, but conditions stop me. All I can say is only a few French doctors are fine and the nurses are fine too. I'm not hurt bad, and I'm writing to you. So I really appreciated the gift bags from home. And now, the first local soldier died, June 15th, Gazette, Roy Cruces. Now, he's one of the 8 names. Remember, Henry Suckley was really the first person that died, but he was not a soldier. He was an ambulance driver. So Roy T. Cruces was the first soldier to die. And how did he die? Well, he died of measles in an army camp in the United States. Now, you have to remember, this is 1918, okay? If somebody sneezed on you, you died. There was no antibiotics. There was nothing. You would get pneumonia. You would get, typhus, typhoid. The trenches were filthy. If you got a scratch, let alone getting shot, you would get infected and you would die. More soldiers died from not getting shot than the ones that actually died from getting shot and killed. If you got wounded, you probably died. So it's an interesting story. Roy Cruces, he got measles. He enlisted in March, died at Poughkeepsie. He was born in Rhinebeck, May 21st, 1898, the only child of George and Mary Cruces. He was valedictorian of the graduating class of Rhinebeck High School in 1916. These boys were young. These boys were very young. Graduate was awarded first prize of $5 for delivering the best essay. After graduation, he went to Boston, took a course in Burnett Business College, prepared to enter the seminary. So he died. There's some letters from camp, from the front, I mean. Captain Herbert Lewis writes from France, May 26th. Dear, just returned from our base after an absence of nearly 5 days on special duty, during which time I passed there an area of such ruin and desolation that it simply beggars description, for me at least. Dante's Inferno could have nothing on such sights as I witnessed, and living as you do amid peace and quietness you would not comprehend anyway. Shell holes everywhere, some large as ordinary cellar, most filled with water and filth, veritable death traps, the earth drenched with poison gas and devilish invention used so effectively by the Germans. It isn't fighting where a man has a chance for his life, but just plain murder. A man can't see, breathe, or hear for that matter. And yet, does all this frightfulness cause fear? No, on the contrary, nothing but increased hatred and desire for revenge. And believe me, I wouldn't be healthy for any pacifist pro-German to have wandered in our vicinity during one march, judging from the mutterings of the men who are as fine a bunch of fellows as I've ever met, and truly a polyglot crew, and ready and willing to, at any times, to go to the limit for the good old U.S. and the flag. So, conditions obviously were pretty bad. And here's a war letter that you would find interesting. A war letter from Bertram Quick, May 30th. I received your letter. Well, Dad, everything here is the same as it's been since we arrived up there, but we hope it will end toot sweet. The U.S. boys are surely doing their bit, doing it without a kick. It's a case of people going back home. Will just be up to us. We'll go to Berlin. Just now I'm having a little rest. It's Decoration Day and my squad is off duty for the day, except that we groom and feed and water our horses. I am in the demolition squad, mounted, and we do a lot of riding. Believe me, it isn't for pleasure either, but we're delighted to have the honor of doing it. The men are all hand-picked, as officers say, except me. I was just told, Corporal Quick, can you ride? Yes, sir. Well, report for duty at so-and-so. Finis. It was easy. I'm tickled to death with the boys, the finest bunch on the map, and we'll stay here and be at the finish. So he was in the mounted. It's a lot of horses. You'll read about it in the article in our newsletter next month. 8 million horses were killed in the war. They were slaughtered. They had mounted cavalry with spears like King Arthur, and they charged machine gun nests, and the men and the horses were slaughtered. And the horses died from pulling wagons and cannons. And if the horses were starving, they killed and ate the horses. It was not good to be a horse in the war. So to give you a different perspective, this is Miss Merritt. Ethel Merritt, she was one of Rhinebeck nurses that went over there. She heeded the call that came over. And the refugees, poor things, have been pouring in from the invaded districts at the rate of 40,000 a day. We feed them and sometimes clothe them, and then they're taken in trucks to other stations or aisle sheeters. They are so pathetic, poor creatures, clinging to a few treasures as a rabbit or a bundle of clothes. We get some wounded too from the dirty Germans, sometimes amuse themselves by firing on the refugee train. Miss Merritt, while taking a vacation, was rising at dawn with another nurse, Miss Jennings, reported for work at the canteen in Paris. One evening we worked at the Gare de l'Est. A short time when the inspector came and rushed us to the Gare d'Ivry, there a whole train of wounded Americans. They were the first I have seen, and were splendid. Such pluck and enthusiasm, and so full of big fight, they'd just been, and all eager to get back and give them hell. We fed them, and they were a hungry bunch. We redressed some of them and saw them in train for the hospital on the coast. Such a luxurious hospital train, everything possible for the comfort of the men, quite different from the third class and cattle cars our wonderful French soldiers travel in. The French are loud, and the praise of our American soldiers wasn't it fine. They know if anyone could. Our canteen work has been very interesting, and I'm not only doing it temporarily while I wait for my papers at On Mount. So that was a letter from a nurse. I have a couple of more letters. George T. Cannon, wounded by the Huns, and dear mother and all, just a few lines to let you know that on the 17th of June, about 6:30, I was wounded in the right thigh. I'm now at the hospital getting the best of treatment. We went over the top to capture some machine guns. When we made the charge, I got mine. The bullets did not go all the way through, but when I got to the hospital, they got it out okay. Don't worry about me, because I will soon be well again. I received a letter you wrote in May, and was certainly glad to hear from you. I just got a letter from Wilson Atkins the same day. So I'll close now. Don't forget to write. By the time you get this letter, I'll be walking around again. P.S. I made corporal a month ago, so you will have an address. And here it is, American Expeditionary Force, and his address. Corporal Bell died. His 23rd year. He was born in New York City. He lived in Rhinebeck for the past 5 or 6 years on the White Schoolhouse, the eastern portion of the town. He enlisted July 1917. He served in the front trenches and been on duty as long as weeks at a time without being able to remove his clothing. He was taken ill in the trenches. That's what I said. The trenches were a death trap. Soon after being removed to a hospital, he died. He was due for promotion at the time of his death. He just died. They don't even say what he died from. And here's November 20th. We're getting 30th, this is, I guess, after the Armistice, has 3 soldiers in France. Miss Elizabeth Asher of Rhinebeck had 3 sons, all serving at the American Expeditionary Force, and it's Lester, Alan, and Earl. And obviously they were not any of the 8 boys that died, so I guess they made it home alive. Just 2 more. Edward Fitzpatrick, killed in action. And he was actually killed in action. He was 29 years of age. And Mike Frazier made a trip to France, and he stopped 2 years ago, and he stopped at this cemetery and took a picture of Edward Fitzpatrick, private of the Battalion 77th New York, September 10, 1918. I thank Mike for taking that picture. He said the cemetery was between Paris and Reims, I think he said where it was. And here's Guy Pindar, and he died of pneumonia, October 24, 1918. American Expeditionary Force. He was from Rhinecliff. So the war comes to an end in the end of 1918. Another thing that started killing the soldiers was the Spanish flu. Everybody read about 50 to 100 million people died 1918, 1919 from the Spanish flu. And now you had the soldiers staying there. The Armistice was November 11th. The Treaty of Versailles was not until June 28th of the following year. So the soldiers stayed in France. Remember, most of these boys are from farms. They're out in the country. They didn't get to see a lot of people. And now you put them all together in very tight quarters and dirty conditions. Disease would spread, and the flu spread as well. And it was a great danger. A lot of people died from the flu, soldiers as well, waiting to go home for the war to actually end. So on October 4th, Germany asked for an armistice. I said, they made a decision that they would end the war and not wait the winter. On October 30th, Turkey requests an armistice. On November 9th, the Kaiser resigns and leaves for exile in the Netherlands for the rest of his life. So everyone knew that there would be the armistice on 11/11 at 11 o'clock. So there was a victory parade held here in Rhinebeck, the first victory parade, which was not Armistice Day, not the end of the war. And there was a big demonstration. There was a parade. People were joyous as the final news that the fighting in the greatest war was over. The bloody murder had come to an end. So the Hun domineering arrogance and savagery. Defeated and humiliated, the emperor has abdicated and escaped to neutral territory in the Netherlands. Here's a picture of the parade on November 11th. That's in front of White's Corner, which is the parking lot now, and down at the end is Liberty Tavern and the Star Library. So that was not the end. Here it is, June 28th, Treaty of Versailles. They signed the treaty, which of course was it took them 8 months to do this, and was such a punishing treaty to Germany that it led to such discontent and eventually to the rise of Hitler in World War II. And here's a page from Helen Delaporte's book describing the parade. The second parade they had was July 4th, 1919, a week after the treaty was signed. It was a good time to do it, the 4th of July parade. And there were many floats in the parade. Here's the names of the 8 boys that died. Henry Suckley, he was an ambulance driver. And there were bands, floats, and a lot of the soldiers had returned, marched in the parade. That's in Helen Delaporte's book from World War I. And here's some of the pictures from that. Here's some of the soldiers lined up in their uniforms. Here's more parade mustering. I'm not sure, somewhere in Rhinebeck. There's nurses and bands. There's horses pulling some of the floats. And so my favorite one, the Dutchess County Ambulance. So that's the war, but what I wanted to end with, I had a bunch of slides. I didn't have any place to put them in the talk. I thought I'd end with about a dozen of these nice World War I posters. To dress extravagantly in wartime is worse than bad form. It's unpatriotic. I like that one. A million boys behind the million fighters. Every American boy should enroll in the Victory Boys. As I said, there was many, many organizations, more than I could talk about tonight. Help him, help us. Help the horse, save the soldier. The American Red Star Animal Relief. A lot of people were worried about the horses, as I said. 8 million died. War. Please help the horses. They look scared. American Red Cross, our boys need socks for the gift bags that they sent over. Knit your bit. Like that. Loose lips might sink ships. I think that was used in World War II as well. So I've already seen that poster. There is a place in the line for you. This place reserved for a fit man. Will you fill it? The American fighter. There's a woman worker. Remember, just like in World War II, the women ran the factories, the stores. The women did all the work that the men were not there to do. And every fighter, a woman worker. Careful to the YMCA. The YMCA took care of the women who were, they went to the munitions factory in a different town, and they needed someone to watch over them. The YMCA took care of that. And my favorite poster, the last one, gee, I wish I were a man. I joined the Navy. Be a man and do it at the United States recruiting station. So that's Rhinebeck in World War I. I hope I didn't go too fast.
Get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run.